5. Thank you all very, very much for coming. Thank you to my fellow panellists. Ladies and gentlemen, 1st of August 1946. Be it enacted by the King's most excellent majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Lords Spiritual, Temporal, and the Commons in the present Parliament assembled, and by the authority of the same as follows. If the Minister is satisfied after consultation with any local authorities who appear to him, to be concerned, that it is expedient in the national interest that any area of land should be developed as a new town by a corporation established under this Act, he may make an order designating that area as the site of the new proposed town. Just 1 year after the election of the Attlee government, that Act reached the statute book. Ladies and gentlemen, history may not repeat, but as several people have said over the years, it does have a tendency to rhyme. And I think we are part of that rhyming this morning. My name is Nicholas Boyce-Smith. I'm the founding chair of Craig Streets. We're a town builder, designer and specialist think tank. We do a lot of work on where people are happy in the built environment, how the planning system works, how public, third and private sector come together to make places in which the body can prosper and the heart can sing. Thank you to our sponsors, SLR. Thank you to you all for coming after the rigours of last night. Thank you to my panel. After that Act, 21 new towns in England, 2 in Wales, 6 in Scotland were created in 3 waves: Stevenage, Crawley, Hemel Hempstead, Harlow, Basildon, Milton Keynes, and many others. Now we've got a uniquely... actually, we're all in here. Brilliant, Mons. Good morning, Grace. That's okay. You snuck in there. We genuinely have a very wide range of perspectives and experts on the panel. I'm going to introduce them in 10 seconds. And what I'm going to ask them all to do as they speak is to try and pull their thoughts together to what their advice would be to the new government, with a very clear mandate to create new towns, echoing that Act of 1946. So starting from... It's very far right, far left is always unfortunate. So starting over there, Mike Axon of SLR, our kind sponsors, who actually Monty said, well, I'm the sponsor, I shouldn't be on the panel. I insisted that, Mike, you're on the panel, because Mike actually does know what he's talking about when it comes to matters of transport planning and cycling. He's been a huge help to Create Streets, and we work together closely on how transport planning should work. Chris Curtis MP, the new MP for Milton Keynes North. Congratulations, Chris. I was probably a little bit late to say that, but sincere congratulations. Before becoming a Member of Parliament, Chris was a political research manager for YouGov, head of political polling and opinion research, and has also thought and written about new towns, and of course represents, I think, what is widely regarded as one of the most successful of the new towns. Immediately on my right, again, I should be taking immediately to this side, is Laura Laker, freelance journalist and a great advocate, a passionate and effective advocate for cycling, and co-host of the well-loved podcast Streets Ahead, which got the scoop on government investment in active travel only a few days ago. Congratulations on that scoop. Immediately to my left, John Lewis, Executive Director of Peabody. One of his portfolio is Thamesmead. What happens to that? That's not quite a new town in the name, but certainly has some of the similar challenges. Previous to that, led expansion of Letchworth Garden City and Milton Keynes. So there is a Milton Keynes theme running through today, as there should be. We may be in the heart of Liverpool, but Buckinghamshire is present amongst us. And then, immediately to his left, welcome Councillor Anthony Okereke, a friend of Create Streets, elected leader of Royal Borough of Greenwich, and also someone who's worked professionally in the built environment in planning and engagement, and a brave and powerful advocate for creating beautiful places, and has put his first foot forward on that, which I highly commend. And then last, but certainly not least, Mary Parsons, a good friend of mine, Regeneration Partnership Director of Lovell Partnership. We worked together on the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission some years ago, and I think it's fair to say we started thinking we were going to disagree on almost everything, and ended up agreeing on almost everything, and became good friends in the process, and is also past chair of the TCPA. So lots of perspectives. That's more than enough from me. I'm going to start over there. I'm going to be a strict chair. 5 minutes max, so 4 preferred. Mike?
Less than 5, I think, Nicholas here. So I'm a transport planner, okay, and my job is to get planning consent for things including new settlements. But it's really not about transport any longer, it's about master planning. The last 30 years I've been asked to provide roads in order to allow people from new settlements to go somewhere else. As it happens though, what happens in the real world, in an existing small town, 65 to 70% of all activity is actually contained within that town. Now, we should be ambitious here, and when we look at new settlements, we should be looking at least 70 to 80% of activity being contained within the settlements. And therefore, the transport infrastructure is not about building big roads to take people somewhere else. Sometimes it's not actually about building rapid transit either. It's about actually designing the settlement in such a way and providing the facilities in such a way that people can actually live there, particularly since travel is now digital, and
Phygital.
Like that, physical? Yeah, made that up. Digital and physical. If you think of it this way, most travel is related to leisure and education. Commuting is a poor third, and it's an even poorer third now that we actually start doing a lot of our commuting on these things, and we do working from home from third places. And therefore, transport infrastructure now is building schools from day one, even if you don't have enough pupils. Building the shops from day one, even if you don't have any customers. The leisure facilities, the parks, the connections. The primary movement network, we say, and so do many of my clients, we say should be the active travel network, alongside which there may be some roads. And then you can worry about all the other stuff, going somewhere else, the 20%, etc. So we're a big advocate of this vision-led approach as opposed to the predict and provide approach. That's now been borne out. Recent public inquiry, Homes England took an authority to public inquiry. Straight battle, vision-led versus a predict and provide. Authority wanted big roads. Homes England said, we want to invest in our community, not the roads, and they won.
Brilliant, that was amazing, 2 minutes of all this. I should have said, thank you very much indeed. Actually, I like claps. Can you give us a I should have said, I'm going to take advantage of the time you've given me back to the panel. So I've deliberately got a wide range of questions to the panel. Where should new towns go? How big should they be? What should they be? How should we move around them? What's the role of master developers versus house builders versus housing association versus SMEs versus the government? What influence will transport changing make to that? How long will it take? Can new towns be beautiful? Should they be? So we'll have all of those themes in this conversation, and then I'm going to ask our speakers to sort of pull those together and invite you to as well. Chris.
Thank you so much. I worked in polling for many years before becoming this, and in the polling world we would take the question, should Newtown be beautiful, and we'd call that leading, I think.
I'm the chair, so we get to do that. Should new towns be ugly? Chris Curtis comes out
what I'm going to try and do is give answers that other people are not going to necessarily cover, I think. Learning, I think, from lessons that we've got in Milton Keynes. But actually, I think one of the first lessons that we need to learn is that we need to learn lessons, and actually the brilliance of new towns, the reason I would make a case, not just through self-interest, but the reason I would make a case that Milton Keynes is Britain's most successful new town is simply because it's the newest. I don't want it to hold that title for much longer, because I want us to be building new towns that learn the lessons, the successes and the mistakes that we made in Milton Keynes, and building them and therefore building places that are much better. But what do I think the main things are that we got learned? So I mean, the mistakes from Milton Keynes are fairly obvious. We didn't quite build it dense enough. We have an over-reliance on cars. We need to make sure that we're not doing that again. In terms of where we're building them, though, I think it is still really important. I think the thing we think about, and it comes back to transport, is there's often seen as an argument of do you build somewhere that is easy to get out of, or easy to get somewhere else from, or build somewhere that's an economic hub in and of itself. And what we got right in Milton Keynes is we did both. And actually that's really important. We've got the headquarters of Santander UK, the headquarters of Red Bull Racing, the fastest Formula 1 team in the world. We've got the league tables.
Okay, let's stop that rabbit hole. Until that rabbit hole blocked.
We've got Network Rail, right? More people commute and travel into Milton Keynes each day than travel out of it, even though we're considered a commuter town. But a lot of these companies feel comfortable moving their businesses and relocating to Milton Keynes because it is so easy to get travel into London. 37 minutes from London used to be 33, but our travel infrastructure in the UK is getting worse, not better at the moment. So that's really that's crucially important. I think they do need to be built on places where you can get to major cities quickly, even if you want them to be big economic hubs. they should be bloody beautiful. It is really important that we prioritise that in what we do. Milton Keynes was built with 40% blue and green spaces. We made sure, we set up an organisation with an endowment when the city was built called the Parks Trust, which manages those green spaces. I think that's a model that works very well, and certainly one that we need to make sure that we roll out to other other new towns as well. And as you would say, Nick, it's important to make sure that our green spaces are integrated throughout the whole of the city, not just linear parks in the middle to take up that 40% and leaving everything. We need to make sure that they're integrated into people's neighbourhoods as well, and be thought about in the way that you do that master planning. I think just to jump back to first principles a bit on this, which is what I keep going back to, I think the most important word in contradiction to the way we do development quite often in the UK is actually variety. Now actually lots of people talk about that in terms of like variety of how you physically build the houses, which if I'm honest I think is almost, it is important, but it's almost one of the least important aspects of variety. It's the variety of everything else that's important. It is variety of the green spaces. It's variety of the leisure activities and that you build alongside the city and those things. So if you see a new housing estate at the moment, everybody sort of focuses on the fact that the boxes that you put the houses in are all the same, but actually part of the problem is the park is exactly the same as the new housing park in the new housing estate that you built next door. It's got the same things in it. The local centre that you built is exactly the same. You've got enough space in that new estate that you've just built for exactly the same size shop as you do next door. Actually, what you need is you need bigger shops and smaller shops, and bigger schools and smaller schools and everything else. So actually, one of the biggest benefits of doing new towns, and the thing that we need to make sure we get right, which is I think quite difficult, depending on how we end up building them, is to make sure that we push variety throughout everything, every element of how we build them. So I'll leave that there because I haven't got time. I don't know if I hit my 5 minutes yet.
No, you've done very good. You've done 4. Thank you very much. I'll give Chris a round. One of the key themes that kept coming up to Mary and me, Chris, when we were running this commission a few years ago, was exactly that. It was that sense of people saying we think that housing is, it just could be anywhere. It doesn't feel like it's of here. It was remarkably powerful. It was put differently in different language by different people, but it was the same point. It just did come up time after time after time. Thank you very much. That's Laura.
Right, I'm going to put myself a timer because I.
It's all right. You've got me.
Okay,
I'm a very good timer.
4 seconds, 5 seconds. So I'm Laura Laker, and I have written about cycling and walking and transport more widely for about 12 years now. This year I published my first book, which is about the National Cycle Network, but it's kind of as a proxy for cycle routes around the UK, and I was very lucky because I got to travel around on my bike under the guise of work and explore kind of some of the great cycle routes and some of the kind of links into towns and cities around the UK. Cycling is such a positive thing. It's great for health. That's one of the key policy levers of this government to improve the nation's health, and it's about prevention rather than cure. And one of the great preventers is if we can build active travel into our daily lives. So being able to walk to the shop, being able to cycle, and not having to get into the car for every single journey. And we know it's great for people on low incomes. This is another kind of key policy element of this government is affordability, and affordable homes also should include transport, because that's a huge cost in people's lives. Is how we get from A to B, and having to own cars and run cars is hugely expensive. So active travel is one of those fantastic things that kind of ticks so many policy boxes, and I think Louise Haig in our interview said this, which is fantastic to hear, because those of us who work in transport know this already, that it has such a great kind of reach far beyond its own kind of envelope. We know that 15-minute cities are becoming more kind of a prominent idea, and they should be, being able to walk to the shops, being able to cycle instead of having to get into the car and for parking and all the stress that causes, and health. But I think there's a kind of problem with the way that we design housing. One of the chapters in my book, I was lucky enough to have a street named after my late father in a new housing development. And so I went to the opening and we stood by the sign, Laker Close, and it was very sweet, it was lovely. But then I came back after the kind of extension to my hometown had been built, and there's no pavements on half of it, there's no new cycling connections, what it's done is generate a load of new car journeys in a very small town that's already over capacity for cars. And so this is a problem that we have with building homes in this country, whereas in different countries in Europe you'd have a new development next to a train station and you'd have cycling and walking links. In the UK we build a road and we design for roads and we design for greater junction capacity, and we don't think about cycling or walking, or it's thought about at the beginning and then somehow it disappears. There's something I learned called adoptable standards, and so it's local councils saying, well, we can't have cycle lanes because what about the maintenance? And it doesn't really make sense, but this is the kind of stuff that we're coming up against. I think when we're building new homes, the standards aren't high in the first place because there's no set standards. And then they're getting downgraded by local authorities who don't want to integrate cycling and don't want the liability, and so that's a problem. You know, even with the greatest ideas in the world or the greatest vision for walkable, cyclable neighbourhoods, when it comes to it, there's a fundamental problem with the way that we're delivering and the kind of structures that exist that mean that they're not happening on the ground. So I think there's a kind of major rethink required. Design manual for roads and bridges, the kind of trunk road standard is still being used for housing developments, you know, like wide splayed junctions which are a nightmare to cross, and kids can't get about safely and you can't cycle, it just feels very unsafe. So there's a lot that needs to be done, but I think there's some great kind of ideas going around. I know that Active Travel England is working as a statutory consultee on housing developments, but they're coming in far too late when the plans are already designed and there's been several years of iterations and nobody wants to go back to the drawing board. So it's like, oh, let's put some extra cycle racks in, let's maybe tweak some accessibility issues, and that's the most they can do. You know, this needs to be thought about and designed in from the beginning, from the kind of early planning stage. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done. I think that there need to be standards set. We have what's it called? Manual for streets. That's a kind of great template that we can use, rather than every single local council having different standards. And so I think there's a lot we can do, but yeah, it's a great potential, but I think there's still hurdles to overcome in order to make those communities that we all know we need.
Brilliant, thank you. I suspect, I hereby predict, thank you, that was excellent, thank you, Laura, there may be consistency on this panel about views in cycling versus driving. I probably share that consistency, but I genuinely encourage people who disagree to challenge us and do push at that. Don't feel just because we sitting behind this desk all think this that you shouldn't. So I would encourage dissent if that in the nicest possible way. We've got important themes emerging, how we move around within the towns and where they are, the variety in their pattern. John has, as I was saying earlier, John has actually worked in a series of new towns and a big urban intentions. John, what do you think? How can the government, I might sort of put it out, what can the government do? What should the third sector do? What should the private sector do? Are new towns buildable? How long will it take? What are the big themes?
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you.
All of those things I would like to say. Yeah, just very quickly by way of introduction. So I'm a resident and a constituent of Chris's actually in Milton Keynes, and I've lived there for over 30 years and raised a family there. So just speaking personally, I absolutely buy into when communities have been planned and everyone's thought about all aspects of what makes and supports a great family life. Milton Keynes has got that writ large, and I say that from experience rather than any form of professional planner or property advisor. At Peabody, which is also relevant to your question, is we've been going since 1862. We're a large house.
But not you personally.
No, correct. But 1862 we started with a philanthropic backer who said, let's create some social housing because there was some appalling conditions in London at the time, and what could they do about it? Whilst there's lots of different language around that, we find ourselves in the same challenge of just a huge lack of not just social housing but all housing for this country. And interestingly, I don't know anyone who doesn't say we need more homes in the UK. So when we have a nation that says we will need them, it's really interesting how many people then suggest we don't want them. And I think that is the big challenge. And so in answer to your question, how do we go about this? Well, I'm a massive fan of plagiarism. It got me through 2 degrees, so that's a real result. But the reason I say that is the last time the Labour government was in power, there was an enormous amount done to recognise how supply needed to be addressed in this country. They were brave enough to suggest that they recognised you couldn't just deal with one local authority, then another. There had to be some blend. There was support by national government to see how delivery vehicles could be brought in at a local level. Because from a practical point of view, when you say work in Milton Keynes, and I was involved in the second round of growth at the time in the 2000s, where basically you couldn't stick to the red line of the city boundary. You had to recognise there were other local authorities you had to work with. So partnerships often thrown into the mix as something we need to look at. But you need a real backbone and support to make those partnerships work. But they can work, they can be quite fraught at times, but if you have a national government who recognises growth has to happen and supports that and encourages local authority both financially and structurally to do that, you really can start to address delivery. So my sort of plea for where we could go is slightly backwards. There was a thing called the Sustainable Communities Plan that John Prescott waved a flag for, set up growth regions. There were, I think, 5 in the end. There were urban development structures in form of corporations, some of them democratically structured, some of them not so democratically structured, and I think that's a big debate, and I'm sure Anthony's going to have some views around that.
Are you pro or anti-democracy?
I'm always pro-democracy, of course. Well, I'll come off the fence of you, which I actually think when you have national issues that need dealing with, like transport, I believe housing is absolutely a national crisis and therefore a national agenda. I think we need to make national decisions.
Yes.
So I feel very strongly that we need to start taking some brave, as if I'm the government, the government needs to take some brave decisions and say this is where things have to be built. And then where the democracy comes in is, in my view, how do we build those? As in, what do they look like? What do we need? What are the requirements to make this place absolutely thrive? If it's somewhere that's never been built before, then that is hugely exciting, but also very challenging. If it's an extension to somewhere, there's obviously some grain you can work with. And I think it's not one size fits all, but there is a massive opportunity, in my view, to do something really, really exciting. Because the other thing I'd love to just go back to whether it's Garden Cities, whether it's when Peabody started, whether it's when the Keynes Development Corporation started, this idea of ambition and excitement to see something new is something we've lost. And I think now, as we face this huge challenge for more homes, the excitement of civic pride, modernity, all those things where we can see people wanting to see something for a generation that is failed miserably by us lot who've had very nice homes and many supported by very nice pensions as well. We need to really support the youth, and I think bringing that excitement back into creating new places for them is something we should really tap into.
Brilliant, thank you. I think there was a reason I chose that quote to start with, partly because I like saying things like His Kingdom, Sex and Majesty, but also actually because it was that sense of national requirement and need, which I think is parallel today. Anthony.
Thank you very much. Can I just say how wonderful it is to have a Labour government? I remember when I was...
We're likely to get a clap on that one.
I was door knocking during the election, and I started door knocking in this urban extension, and it was advertised as this wonderful, fantastic place, and it was anything but. It was absolutely miserable. It was difficult to walk. I didn't understand how prams and wheelchairs used the spaces. It was awful. People weren't encouraged to cooperate or interact with each other. People had a car parking space where they just went into their houses, and there was no such thing as a community. And I guess what the challenge is with new towns is that it presents an opportunity to get community right. It presents an opportunity to solve our public health issues. It presents an opportunity to deal with loneliness and all these other things. And actually, new towns, fantastically, I think we can make work really well. But I guess the only difficulty thing is that currently, in the same arguments you kind of make about resource, new towns to me is almost like a dream, right? But the reality on ground and the lack of resource around councils means that we've got to resource councils well enough to get to the dream. Because if we don't do that, what you're going to get is this two forces clashing against each other, right? Where we don't have the vision in place, and it's probably led by the developer or someone else, a vision in place that sets out what the standards is going to be for pavements, how we're going to bring people together, and how we're going to make sure the planning works. The local authority has to set the vision in partnership with the industry to say this is how we're going to design a sustainable community, and that takes resource and investment. And that's how you get the vision for the new town. But if we don't invest in that, you'll get this dream, but the reality will be very different. It will be about actually, we haven't got cash to maintain the cycle lanes. It will be about, this is not the right materials because it's not quite expensive. We have to think about how we get the dream and deal with the reality on the ground to make sure we achieve the vision. You know, I want to live in places where it feels beautiful to walk outside of your door. And I think everyone does. And I think the community part is going to be such an important role for our communities to make and play in that. In terms of designing, in terms of thinking about what the future could be of a place. So urban extensions, happy with. Areas where there probably needs to be a whole new town and there isn't a vast community there, I agree with development corporations. I think it's a worthwhile place to go because it brings in that additional resource to get the job done. And that's the kind of support that we need. And lastly, I'm going to be lobbying my MP, Matthew Pennicott.
Does he have any power in the matter?
I tell you what, I told him I was speaking at this panel, and he said, make sure they don't confuse your views for mine. And I said, no, that's totally fine, that won't happen. But I think that the argument I want to hit on from a local authority perspective is I want to set the vision. You know, planning and development has to be a joint up partnership role that we tackle together in terms of creating new spaces. And then we're not going to design those invisible inequalities that we don't often see. We have to make sure we're designing out invisible inequalities through all of our developments and giving people the opportunity to live their best lives. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And we've been taking that down verbatim and live tweeting that under Matthew Pennicott. That's what you asked us to do. So let the record say that Anthony was speaking on behalf of housing. Thank you. That was there's real hope in the conversation so far, but there's nervousness as well. This is not easy. Things can go wrong. There are challenges. Mary, you're very much in the business of turning dreams into reality. Sorry, that was a little bit cheap. Pull the first part of our conversation together. How's this going to work?
Well, first of all, can I say no one's ever described house builders as turning dreams into reality. So Nicholas, thank you for that. But I thought I was going to try in my 5 minutes to tackle the popular, durable, viable and fair. But picking up a couple of other comments, echoing Chris, if we're ever going to deliver the new towns today, we have got to go back to when we were last delivering them, to both understand how we got that scale and pace of delivery, which we haven't touched since, but also that bit about why some have flourished and others perhaps less so. But you have to think, last time we were doing this, mankind was trying to get to the moon, really, when new towns were at peak. And you kind of feel there's a bit of a natural analogy there, that we've lost the art of both. You know, we had the tenacity, the vision, the ambition, we invested resources. Now it feels like we've got to go back to the start and relearn it again, because we've lost that sort of institutional memory and the political will to be that brave. So when I was chair of the TCPA, I had the real privilege of working alongside a lot of the original architects and deliverers of the last wave of new towns. And some of the lessons from Milton Keynes they taught me, and John, picking up what you're saying about it's for future generations. All of them were in their 20s and 30s when they were doing this and running the development corporation. All of the architects, I believe, on Milton Keynes had to be under the age of 40. So let's look to the future. You do need to invest those resources. At peak, Milton Keynes Development Corporation employed 1,700 people. That's almost double what Homes England employs nationally. And you do need government investment, but if you do it right, the government will get that investment back and more. At peak, Milton Keynes was borrowing 500 million per annum from the Treasury. So there aren't any sort of cheap fixes to do this right. So picking up on the 4 points, popular, you know, are we talking about existing residents where these places are going to happen, in which case highly unlikely to be, or the people that will have the chance to live there? Which are the ones we really need to focus on, because all of the original new towns were built on the premise of a better, healthier way of life, and we've got to absolutely offer that again. But I think picking up the point Chris was saying about creating something unique, you've got to look beyond the bricks and mortar. If you look at Harlow, a place that I absolutely, out of the new towns, I absolutely love. Gibbard's legacy wasn't the architecture, it was the art and the sculpture. And to this day, I still think Harlow is the only place where there is a Rodin outside of its Nando's. But it makes it unique. Durable, I think, Anthony, picking up your point, you've got to put stewardship and curation of place in from the outset. Look back to Letchworth to understand what really makes that unique to this day. But it's also about asset creation and endowment, and actually where the new towns started to fail was when, and it was the Thatcher government, forced them to sell off their assets and their town centres to pay back the Treasury. And if we look at all the big regeneration headaches we've had since, Stevenage, Harlow, Cumbernauld, Corby, if they'd have been allowed to keep those assets and build some resilience for the future, we wouldn't be scratching our heads as to how we deal with their regeneration now. And I think if you look at Harlow, if you actually plan and deliver a place in a comparatively short period of time, then its infrastructure and its resources are going to start to creak and fail in exactly the same period of time. You've got to plan in that ability, as Milton Keynes had. You know, for me, the big thing, the difference between the two, Milton Keynes continued to grow and flourish and invest and then regenerate. Harlow was wrapped around by Greenbelt and it couldn't until recently. Viable, won't get into the debate about land values, but my starting point is don't try and assess whether a new town's viable off a house builder viability model. Yes. It's not the same thing at all. Fair, we can debate percentages of affordable housing, but for me it's how you connect people. The equity of the new towns was how you connected people to the opportunities. And if you look at Harlow, one statistic that always stood out for me, if you look at the average income of someone that lived in Harlow compared to someone that worked in Harlow, you could see this massive disparity because there were loads of really well-paid jobs in defence and pharmaceuticals, but they didn't go to the kids that were growing up and going to school in the town because the schools didn't equip them for it. And so the people, they had to out-commute to find employment, and the people that got the well-paid jobs didn't want the housing offer that Harlow provided at the time. So they commuted in, and this is why it became strangled by congestion with this constant in and out commuting. To be honest, are new towns going to be an answer to the housing crisis today? Are they going to deliver against the 1.5 million in this parliament? Highly unlikely at any real scale. But that isn't a reason to not do them. These are an opportunity for a massive investment into this country's future economic success, just like the first ones were. And I really hope all parties get behind current government to do them.
That was brilliant, thank you. Putting lots of art threads together. New towns, old challenges. How do we create new places which are popular and durable, viable and fair? I think we've got lots of themes emerging. I now want to thread open to the floor. I'm going to be quite strict. Yes, I can see that you want to ask a question. You open your mouth loud, wider. So I will come to. I will keep it short. Please no speeches. Short, sharp questions. If it is directed to one person, that's fine. But I may choose to direct it to someone else. Lady there in red. Otherwise, she's going to throw something at me.
There's a couple of seats if anyone wants to sit down at the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Tracy Bailey. I'm City Councillor in Milton Keynes.
Has Milton Keynes come up so far?
No, hardly so. So we've got a lot of things right. We've got the vision, we've got the planning. So my own ward includes a development that's less than 5 years old. It's got some beautiful looking houses, some nice parks, beautiful schools, but we're not getting the sequencing right. So on that new development of over 3,000 homes, a Sainsbury's local just opened yesterday. So those people have been without a local shop for a long time. And Laura would be absolutely horrified to find out that despite the fact Milton Keynes has a brilliant redway system, you can get around from one end to the other without going across a major road. On this new development, because we've got 3 developers who have been in charge of the housing, they've got 3 stretches of redway which don't join up.
That's a bad thing.
So my question is how can we make sure in these new developments we get the sequencing right?
Thank you. I'm going to bring that to Mike and then to Mary, but I'm going to take another 2 questions first. So remember that question. Could you just pass it to the gentleman 2 along, please?
Oh.
There we go. Oh, that's me. Then we'll come back to you. I'm teasing you.
variety.
Yeah.
Roger Geffen, Low Traffic Feature Alliance. My question is going to be a plea to Chris in a moment. We're running a campaign called around close-knit communities, and I suspect it won't need explaining. The idea that, as Mike was saying, we need to be able to get around within the communities by all the sustainable transport, by active travel and all the rest of it, and to be able to get in and out by public transport too. That needs to be within easy walking distance of your home. The question is, how do we make sure that we get, in future, we get the right homes in the right places? Politicians have been saying these phrases for ages, and yet developers have been, continuing to build the wrong homes in the wrong places. We haven't been able to say no to them. I was delighted you provided an example of one case that they did. But at the moment, I don't think we've got a good test for local authorities to reject.
I'm going to move you on. Gentlemen to your right, and then we're going to come back to Dan. Thank you.
I can see we've got a very hard chair.
Told Laura I was here.
I'm going to come. Legacy. We've got a legacy. We must live on and learn from that legacy. It's a national legacy. We must learn from that. We must bring those lessons together. I want to come to design codes.
I want you to come to a question as well.
There's a design. A lot is being said about design codes by this government, but there is a gap. So my question is, how are we going to go about making sure that we've linked the lessons from the new towns into a new set of design codes?
Brilliant. That's a very good question. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to start with Mike, and then I'll just come, because there was 3 songs there. Don't respond to everything, but Mike, I think can bring to you.
Yes, no, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come clean, okay? I'm from Milton Keynes.
My parents live outside Milton Keynes. Just pretend. Is there anyone not from Milton Keynes in this room? I might be from Milton Keynes. No. Mike, no, sorry. You don't have the microphone.
I also own a couple of leisure businesses in Milton Keynes. I've got a vested interest, okay, in Milton Keynes growing and being successful, so I'm very keen on that. But your point about delivery phasing, very, very good point, because in the past what has happened with development is that you haven't provided facilities until they become commercially sustainable. And that's why sort of North Stowe, for instance, didn't have a shop until 1,000 homes got built. That is exactly what we're not trying to do with new settlements, and that's why I'm saying that we're investing in facilities, even though they're not commercially sustainable, in the same way that we used to invest in roads. So, for instance, in the Homes England successful appeal up in Preston, in the 106 legal agreement, we actually committed to providing these, not just the facilities and the shops and mobility hubs, which I can come on to later, on day one, even though they're not commercially sustainable. We'd have to put 10 million quid into something to keep them going. But we also said that we were providing the active travel connections into the remainder of the community on day one as well, so that you start as you mean to go on. Now, in the past, that was all sort of, we'll do it if you like, but we really don't care. Now we are saying that actually is what we want to do to make these new settlements work from day one. And of course, in Milton Keynes, the roadways are actually great. There's an awful example there. The only thing I say about the roadways, I can never find my way around them. I always get lost.
I'm going to press pause on Milton Keynes. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Mary, and then anyone else on the panel who wants to come in.
So, picking up exactly what you were saying there, but a couple of things. For me, a lot of is the timing of the social infrastructure, and particularly the schools. And I will mention Milton Keynes, because when I was developing there, we did get the school in early. But the challenge was that bit about opening up to the wider community meant as the homes were coming along, there weren't places in the school for the people that were moving in. They got all on the outside. So it is getting that balance right and streaming them. One that worked on with Mike to the north of Harlow, we were trying to get the schools in, and actually it was the county councils that were pushing against it, because they were saying, you can't stream the forms of entry in. But unless you do, you had an 80% modal share in terms of in favour of sustainable transport modes. And unless you do that, the second people move in and they have to get in the car to go about their daily life, you've lost it. You'll never ever get that back. So I think we do have to think that bit about how we stream some of it. I take your point about putting the commercial in that in, but did you say subsidy of 10 million? Is that really a good subsidy? I wouldn't say so, but could we look at meanwhile uses? So again, put the resources and things that people need on a daily basis to go about their daily lives, somewhere they can grab a pint of milk, nurseries and so on, but you can think about them on an interim ahead of the final state, and I think that's something we need to do more at scale as
Brilliant.
well.
Thank you. Any other responses to the three questions?
Just very quickly, I think this perhaps comes into the whole issue around who's in charge, really. Because I think if you have a structured delivery agency or authority, whatever that is, they're the ones who own the master plan, they're the ones who own the timetable, they're the ones who can insist things happen first. And I think, I don't know, what can we call Milton Keynes so we don't mention it again, but I think there was
Town in Buckinghamshire.
City.
It's a city.
City, oh God.
You are in trouble, yeah. No, but I think what's
Everything's a city these days.
really interesting is there was a financial mechanism in a couple of decades ago, which was called the MK tariff, which is all about having money up front, which is then repaid by developers as they built. What that meant is there would never be that situation with the Redway, because the Redways would have been built. And then also it allows developers, house builders, to build the houses. And usually developers, whatever you think of design and quality, whatever, they are quite good at building houses, as in what they're asked to build. They're not so good at thinking about the long-term infrastructure that they have no interest in. So give the interest and control to the people who have got that stewardship role long-term.
A very important answer. Anyone else want to come in on that?
I mean, I'll just add to the point about HIF funding. You know, that's a real good opportunity to be able to put that infrastructure in front of to kind of get rid of that kind of situation. But I think that then lends itself to the fact that you're right. Developers are always going to build the houses in line with what they need to be able to fund it, right? So therefore, you do need that additional investment, and that's the role that government can play with supporting potentially a development corporation who puts that resource into it, who helps lead that vision and make sure the right infrastructure is there.
Thank you very much. Laura, quickly, then I'll go back to the audience.
Yeah, so in terms of linking up, I think having Active Travel England in early, changing that kind of process so that they're in at the site allocation or pre-application stage would help to kind of stop these problems from happening, because they would be inspecting and the funding would be contingent. I think in terms of the right homes in the right places, I know a lot of the new towns are going to be in cities. City regions, mayors don't have planning powers. But they do have transport budgets, and they can say where they'll allocate transport links, and so that's the kind of lever that city regions can use, and say where they'll spend the money. And I think the lessons learned from existing towns, Stevenage famously has a fantastic cycleway network that nobody uses. They've got the same levels of cycling as outside of Stevenage. 35% of journeys are under 3 miles, and only 1.9% of people cycle. I think it needs to be like, if we're going to be bold, the primary network, so many short journeys, as you've said in Milton Keynes, as Mike's also said, the primary network should be, for most of our journeys, which are short journeys, it should be the cycling and walking network. I think if we're going to do something new and we're thinking about the future, we think about health and environment, think about active travel first, and have it as European cities, the cars go round.
And I think it's just worth adding that, brilliant, if I may, sorry, the chair's not having a point of view. Of course, if you do that, you can move from, say, 25, 26 homes per hectare to 40 or 50 or 60, while still making a good place. The amount of land you need actually collapses, as well as the reduced infrastructure. Right, back to the floor. Lady at the back with the red. Gosh, we can't say we haven't got an engaged audience. Right, lady there, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Courtney. I'm a councillor in Cllr Council, which is
where's her in?
Halifax. Cllr
Oh,
Council.
I love Cllr. Yes, thank God. Yes, Halifax, not Milton Keynes. Marvellous.
Yeah, not Milton Keynes. In fact, and not a city. And I'm the lead.
Very beautiful town, though.
Very beautiful. And I'm the lead member for Regeneration and Transport. So this is really interesting. All of this. We've got some new garden suburbs coming up. I'm also on the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Transport Committee, which is the transport bit's quite a new bit to my portfolio, so I'm still learning. But it's interesting you say about the metro mayors having that transport, having some say over transport, but it's sort of limited because we've got some new garden suburbs coming up in Calderdale, and there is a train station, there's a railway line and a train station, and a new train station coming up that's going to be connected, and there are plans to to connect all that in actively, which is amazing. But when I asked at the Transport Committee, Northern Rail, can we put more trains on when those come in line? They didn't even know about them. They said, well, it takes years and years to be able to change the timetabling. So my question is, and I suppose it's all about systems approach. My question is, and it's about the systems approach. So how do we make sure that all of the stakeholders, because it is a systems approach, how do we make sure that we do get people like the train companies to be able to buy into this well? Because while it is brilliant to get people just moving around their own little area, how do we get the other people?
Very, very important question. Thank you very much. And just the gentleman in front. There we go. Thank you. Hi.
Sam Demici, Bristol Remain. Read our report with Create Street. I think about four or five copies at the back.
There you go. Yeah.
My question is, let me be a bit provocative. Should there be any new settlements north of Cambridge in the New Towns programme?
That's a good question. Thank you. Good. Thank you for that. The gentleman there in the blue jacket.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for a really interesting panel. Toby Varian from SLR Consulting. I think my question is actually for Anthony. I'm really interested in what you were saying about the partnership with private developers as well. I just wondered if you could maybe point to what you think that would look like in an ideal world. I think Angela Rayner has already said that she'd like 40% of the new homes coming from new town developments to be private, to be led by the private sector. So I think I just wanted a bit more of an understanding of what that would look like in your world.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to come to Anthony for that question. So I think that was fairly clear, and then I know we're going to come back to the panel. Now.
I think partnership needs to involve developers and all those people about services. You know, in Greenwich, we've got Places for London, which is a TfL company, who's just gone into joint partnership with Network Rail, thinking about how they bring their lands together and think about services and development. But I think on that partnership point, actually, we work quite well in Thamesmead. Thamesmead in Abbeywood is a new fantastic opportunity area. We have developers around the table, the council around the table, opposite councils around the table, working with government, working with the mayor, all sitting down, being very vulnerable with our pants down, exposing our difficult issues that we have. Now,
your issues may be difficult, Anthony.
Our difficult.
Don't know what's going on down there.
But it is about equal partnership and being vulnerable and lending our voice to each other's issues. And we have to be grown-ups in the room to be able to do that. We're advocating, working through a business case at the moment to get the DLR to Thamesmead to make sure we can build 15,000 homes. That doesn't take, that won't work with that kind of siloed approach. So we've got to be really serious and say we're going to have grown-up partnerships with industry, and industry needs to also be grown up with us and lend our voices to each other so that we can achieve the missions and the dreams that we want to achieve to make sure we get people into the right beautiful places.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Just going to come to Chris on the difficult question about north of Cambridge, or I might say north of Milton Keynes. Just on that, and then I'll come to the rest of the panel on the first question.
Well, the obvious cop-out answer is that there's a commission that's looking into this and I look forward to see the recommendations. No, I don't think we should. Ultimately, we've got a housing crisis mostly in the southeast of England. Not entirely, but mostly in the southeast of England. We need to build more houses in the southeast of England. We need to build more new towns in the southeast of England. But of course, the other thing, we've talked about this, I think actually that's a common theme running through these points, is that new towns in themselves can stimulate demand because they're such exciting, interesting regeneration projects. So I don't actually think that I think in many of the urban extensions, there's probably more of an argument for focusing the big ones on the southeast of England. Actually, the new towns, there's possibly more of an argument for pushing them at different parts of the country because they can in themselves then push resources around the country and economic development as well.
Thank you, Chris. Now, Anthony brilliantly partly answered the first question as well as the third. Would anyone like to comment on the transport phasing? John?
Oh, I was going to comment on
that's
the
fine. That's fine.
No, I just wanted to say that I think what's interesting, pick up what Anthony just said about Thamesmead. So, and this to me really echoes what I was saying about sort of civic leadership, because you've got a council that's saying we want this growth, we want this to happen, and then you've got a partnership structure in terms of land ownership, which is us and our partner Lendlease, who we've spent £3 million on a master plan so far. We're putting a lot of investment to the TfL, Transport for London, paying for the business case that's going to be submitted to to government. And this is all at risk. Now, the rewards could be great, but luckily for us, as Peabody, we're taking a long-term approach. We really aren't worried about place, and we do chime with what's being said. But in a way, I would love to be able to see a fully resourced local authority sitting there with maybe, 30 people in the planning team dedicated to Thamesmead waterfront to really drive what's needed for the local communities in the area. It's completely around the wrong way, and that's down to resource. So you can see how a focused delivery vehicle bring that through, and we could sit there and use that money probably even more efficiently. But at the moment, we're having to drive an agenda, which I think the council would much rather be driving directly.
100%.
But it's just not resourced, and that's just wrong.
Okay, very, very important point there. Any other responses?
Can I pick up the point about the location of new towns? Does that mean the other ones won't be new anymore when these ones are
They'll be less new.
They'll just be new towns.
Right.
We're veering from serious conversation into cheap satire. Now back to the serious conversation.
It does strike me, if we look at them as a response to the housing crisis, we're going to focus them south of Cambridge. We're going to look at the university corridor. We might not have an Oxfam corridor the same, but that bit about where there is the real pressures. But if these are about economic growth and sustainable economic growth, we should be looking at them. And you can say that the previous ones, it was the ones in the north, failed. That's because they lost their economic purpose. And we've then had waves of things like housing market renewal, levelling up, if we're allowed to mention it in the room. But it is that bit about a place has to have a purpose.
Yes.
If it's only about housing, it's a dormitory to another place. And so I would love to see the task force really working with the combined authorities to look under devolution as to where the ones outside of the South East should go, because I think we need them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lisa. I'm going to come back to the audience now. Lady right at the back with blonde hair.
I think of it as great.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, it looks long. I hope that's not in any way ableist or ageist or wrong in any way.
No, it's wonderful. I'm fooling people. Firstly, you've all made a terrible mistake. Milton Keynes is not the best new town in the country because I'm from Crawley Labour Party.
All right, well, you're outvoted, I think, on this panel. But anyway.
But you're still wrong. It's definitely the best new town. The thing I wanted to say was, from our experience in Crawley, I do have a housing manifesto, I'm not going to do that. But the thing that we need to really look at is how we diversify and put in place an economy. In Crawley, we really suffered in the pandemic. Originally, our economy was based on an industrial estate, but really, when it was first built, there was no Gatwick Airport. Very quickly, our economy is built around Gatwick Airport. The industrial estate serves Gatwick Airport. Everything serves Gatwick Airport. You must look at putting in places people can work close by. It's really, really, really important.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay. I think that theme has come up, and I just say, if I may, towns that only have one employer are the least resilient to economic change. You know, the case of Birmingham in the 70s got to that. The gentleman with the grey hair, just there, and pink shirt. Okay, the gentleman with dark jet black hair.
Yes, I'm Chris Weller, honorary delegate Canterbury in Kent, and the building inspector. Just a quick question then. You were talking about higher density. Are we saying now that flats are good, houses are bad, or is it about townhouses? What are we talking about? The local plan in my area is all about, it seems to be urban extension and urban sprawl, so I think we'll get away from that.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Gentleman there in the check shirt.
Hi, thanks. Charlie Hinks, Oxfordshire County Council. Coming back to the question of location of urban extensions of new towns, if you start with the missions, highest growth in the G7, but growth in all parts of the country, how would that dictate it? And in particular, I've heard lots of talks this weekend on health, on the NHS moving to a preventative system. What would taking that lens mean for these questions?
Brilliant, thank you very much. Laura, can I come to you on the second part of the last question about preventative health and how that makes us think about this?
Yeah, so we know that 1 in 6 deaths in England are due to inactivity, which is pretty shocking. We know that being sedentary is worse than smoking, and so the greatest solution to that is movement. Before I was a journalist, I was studying to be a dietitian, and what I learned there, and what's really stuck with me, is that incidental exercise, kind of building activity into your day, is what helps to keep us healthy. Because I went to the gym once, was very confused and left. But because I cycle,
once more I went to the gym.
Yeah. What is this place? Oh, it's so dark and loud.
What gym were you at?
New town.
It's like a nightmare. But
It's in Milton Keynes. Sorry, it was in Crawley. Sorry.
Ooh.
Lovely there.
Instead, I get my exercise by cycling through the low traffic neighbourhood that goes to the cycle lane, that goes through the Olympic Park, and and that's how I get exercise. One of the main ways I get exercise, and that's just a wonderful thing, right? So that's just a very, very easy way of solving that problem of us quickly becoming the sick man of Europe, apparently, and yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So we also had a question. We had a question about typology and density. Those who know me know.
Do you have any strong views on that?
I have a few. Try and keep them in. And I think we had a point made about, I think correctly, about diversification of employment. Any comments on either of those, Mary?
Yeah, and I think it's picking up the point about health. If you go back again to the original new towns, we're a period of planning reform. We haven't had any strategic planning. We don't have an economic strategy, we don't have a housing strategy. It's debatable whether we have an NHS strategy currently, but at the birth of the Planning Act, planning stood shoulder to shoulder with the birth of the NHS, education reform, and all of them had to work together. That's what we've got to get back to, is proper strategic planning, and that really does drive the point on health. Because again, this isn't just about housing, but if you go back even further to Peabody, to the birth of the garden cities and everything, it was about getting people out of really poor, unhealthy, sanitary at that time living conditions. And if you think back to COVID, and the highest mortality rates were in overdense, overcrowded, overoccupied homes. We've got to break that. This isn't just about housing numbers. It is a really, and it goes beyond cycling. It's connection to services, but it is air quality and all of that piece as well.
Brilliant, thank you. There you got a spontaneous applause there. Well done. Thank you to those two people.
I'll take two.
No, it's two more than I've ever had. Mike, you want to go?
Very quickly, health, not transport. We've now got a very clear evidential link between the way in which you design new settlements to enable people to interact and the benefits to mental health and the benefits to physical health, which you can almost quantify.
Okay, brilliant. Listen, so we've got 13 minutes more.
Can I just say, Nicholas, you've not answered the questions on design codes and density, and I'm absolutely astounded.
Well, I'm trying to be a chair as opposed to. No. No one will leave until I've told them all. But no. So we've got 13 minutes more left. I just want to put the panel on a friendly notice that before we end, I'm going to come back to you all and going back to our original question. How do we create new places which are popular and durable, viable and fair? I'm going to try and ask you to sort of say very quickly your top 3 things on that. Above all, trying to reflect on what you've heard from other members of the panel and indeed from our very expert audience. So you're not quite off yet. I'm going to do another round of questions. The lady here in the front in a very striking yellow top. I'm going to stop talking about people's hair colour. It's not very sensible. It's lovely. Same colour as my mother's hair.
I'm an ordinary party member from Camden, where we have quite a lot of regeneration going on. Thank goodness, we're fortunate in that. But my question really is more, before you start talking about standards, is about materials and having what innovation, because I'm completely ignorant about this, what innovation is going on to make sure we don't have disasters such as Grenfell. We had in Camden we had to evacuate a major estate because we found they had similar cladding. But also talking about health, making sure we've got really good materials for people to walk on that are resilient and the housing we build is sustainable. Just walking around here, for example, I'm sure all the paving is meant to be non-slip, but it isn't, you know. And I've got severe osteoporosis. I've had 3 fractures of my spine. So I'm just, you know, talking about being healthy. We need to think about really good materials that will last, not go shabby, that people remain proud of. There's a reason why people like brick, because it lasts and it looks good for a long time. Anyway.
Thank you. There's a reason we use durable actually in the question. Thank you. Very, very good question. Gentleman there in the suit.
Good morning, Mike Knott from Stantec. How does the panel consider, we focus a lot on national politics, but how do new town delivery vehicles deal with the regular election cycle at a local level and that being a challenge to deliver?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Excellent question. And the lady there in the green jacket.
Hi, Hilary Knight, Community Land Trust Network. I wanted to come back to the point about variety. I was delighted to hear Homes England making provision at Northstowe for a co-housing development, and I'm interested in panel comments that it could be standard in every new town, urban extension, to have allocations, community land trust, co-housing group, cooperatives, and really this idea that new communities in terms of the people, not the place, we know takes time to evolve, and to provide opportunity for existing communities of people to go in as the seedbeds and the acorns for the new communities seems to me a really important one. that you've had over an hour, but actually where will more of this come into these important debates and ideas?
Thank you, a very good question. I should declare an interest for both trustees of the CLT network. Chris, can I come to you on both the point about variety, people and local politics, and then come to Anthony quickly on local politics, and then to the others on the panel about materials and health?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with the comment we had earlier. These new towns are going to be important national infrastructure projects, and to a certain extent that does mean that you cannot give veto powers to too many local players. Local democracy and everything else is important in that, but if we constantly continue to live in a country where you give certain parts of the country that kind of veto power, we are not going to get built the things that this country needs to get built, and we're just going to have to accept that. It's a difficult conversation, it's hard, but the consequences of not doing so are so much bigger than the consequences of doing so. What was the other question you want me to answer?
It was. I think you should.
I'm told by the people that have looked into this, and sorry again to go on about it, that the best people-focused model is what we did in Milton Keynes, and it's really important to do that. And you are right. We love talking about the things that we like to build and that are tall and have bricks, but actually. It was going to be the answer to the question that you were going to ask me at the end. God, don't forget about the people that go alongside that whole way we integrate people in the community. I'll just relate that back to one other point, which is a very, very local thing, but one I'm very interested in. Developers can always find a house to hold back to be a showroom, and we talk about what we did in Milton Keynes is they held a house back to be a local community centre and a local hub as well, until the rest of that stuff was built. How you could put a little local shop in the kitchen as well if you want to. Actually, in a lot of these places, that is a model that works well until you can get the rest of that stuff in.
Thank you. Anthony, on the politics.
For politics, I just want to talk about. I mean, we're suffering that same issue ourselves. You know, we're looking at our urban design, but quite specifically, I'm myself sitting down with my cabinet member, really going through plan applications that are coming through the system, making sure that we have great design, great material on buildings. But there's more work that we need to do, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And we've got to be able to design places where people belong. So over the next few months, we're going to be setting out a new place strategy that is really thinking about all of those places that come together and how we support people with disabilities and other things like that. And obviously, Creatures have done a lot of work about how local authorities can get what they need out of developers when it comes to design. And we're putting, for instance, conditions on planning applications. Say this is the standard that we want you to build. Not coming with great CGIs and then change the brickwork to make it look entirely ugly. And on the point about the politics, look, I think with a developed corporation, it would probably overcome that kind of issue. And I've always kind of been nervous about devolution a little bit, in the sense that where you're seeing resident societies getting elected on the mandate to stop development. Actually, I think government have been quite clear in the devolution piece, where we kind of see that we will actually step in and hold authorities accountable to what they need to deliver in the wider mission of the government's missions and objectives. So I think we can overcome it, but we've all collectively got to keep making the voice about new spaces, new communities, new housing. So it's unpopular to be against delivering places where people need to live, because right now, the reality is children are stuck in hotels without access to a hot meal. And everyone should be talking about that. Everyone should be speaking that up. And a big shout out for CLT, because we just got our planning application approved in Greenwich.
Brilliant. Bravo. Anything on the, Mary or John, on the comment about materials and linked health, and I guess durability comes in there as well.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I think Grenfell will always be the day that everyone held their heads in shame that it could have happened. But I think it is a wider point about when we stop putting people at the heart of planning and at the heart of development. We're creating homes, not units, not boxes. These are places for people to live in. And Nicholas, you know the debate we had during the commission and my views on permitted development rights at the time. If you really had to have a debate as to whether something should be converted and have windows for the people that were living in there, something's gone fundamentally wrong. Now, I really hope we have gone beyond that and learned a lot of lessons. But I also think, and it ties into the point about the models of housing as well, we haven't touched today on the wider challenges we've got with things like the demographic shifts, people with, we've got an ageing population, we've got the highest proportion ever of children with special educational needs and that are neurodiverse. How are their needs being catered for in how we design and specify development. We've got a lot to learn, and I think, you know, it's great to see CLT starting to come into the thinking, because this isn't just delivering housing at scale, it's delivering the right housing. And we had a lot of focus. We'd never hit targets for things like self and custom build within big allocations where they say you've got to put 5%. But taking those challenges and things going back to health, one of the biggest impacts we face as we age is loneliness. There's an awful lot of lonely people, and what co-housing does is create real choice for them. So I absolutely think we should be making sure every new place we create should have the opportunity for it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Mary. So we are 4 minutes away from the end. But I'm afraid I won't be able to give you all the chance to think this, but let me pose you all, the audience, the question. How do we create new places which are popular and durable, viable and fair? If you could just, as you're going on to your next event, because this can be always a bit of a run, just trying to actually, what have you taken from this conversation? There has been a lot of agreement, but there have been differences of emphasis. So just encourage you all to take away one thing perhaps that you didn't know or hadn't thought before, just to put that thought in all your heads. Mike, very quickly, top 3, can be top 2 if you really want. Don't have time to expound them, it'll be pulling together the threads. How do we create new places which are popular and durable, viable and fair? Specifically, perhaps things you've heard from the rest of the panel that have made you sort of think again or refocus.
Well, I can see there's a good consensus on what good design is. So what I'm going to say is the big thing that I would like to see is very clear planning system to enable us to prioritise investment in community, prioritise that. Maybe it hasn't been done so far, and that it doesn't take us 3 or 4 years to actually deliver through the process, i.e. a quicker, clearer planning process.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris.
I think 2 points that definitely haven't been touched on when doing the new towns. Think big, don't be stingy, I think is important. These places do need to be big enough to be these sort of interesting economic hubs in and of themselves. We shouldn't just be building small places and pretending that they're new towns, as has happened in the past. And don't be stingy. I'm the first MP from Milton Keynes that was born and grew up here. I needed to make sure I stepped out on this panel once. And when it gave my maiden speech in the House of Commons all about it the other day and talked about the men and women, brilliant people who built the city I call home. The biggest thing I learned from that, we talk about the things that make the city great, the biggest thing I learned from that, the biggest skill they had, which meant that I got the great start in life, growing up somewhere great, was they were really bloody brilliant at getting money out of the Treasury. More than anything else, they were brilliant. And it was a case of like, Fred Roach would turn up at Whitehall on Christmas Eve and refuse to leave until he got his budget. They built it in a way that meant they built the outside roads before they built the inside roads, so they couldn't cut the budgets later. Something we should have probably done with HS2, right? It's doing things like that in order to make sure that you actually can build somewhere and you don't end up getting caught up in the political winds later.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think getting money out of the Treasury is a superpower. But anyway, Laura.
I wanted to reflect a bit on something that Mary said and that Anthony said, that you made a very good point about place needing a purpose. It's not about cycling. I think this is what transport does, and this is what kind of places should do, is create somewhere that people want to be and that has a purpose. It isn't just about being there at night and then moving away in the daytime. And Anthony talking about there's no interaction and lots of developments. This could all be changed if we had the right kind of design standards and that they were set and that individual councils weren't kind of setting out their own that really aren't working, and we know they're not working. And so I think it does, something that's really struck me is having it people-led and about people. This is why we have places. It's about the people that are living there. It's not for cars. It's not for it's not for developers. It should be about people who have to live there. So yeah, I think that's kind of my one. I think that kind of ticks all of the boxes really. Popular. We know that people want to live in places where there's community, where they have transport choice. We know that places that have mixed use are durable. During the pandemic, these CalPAT developments, people suddenly found themselves trapped. They had nowhere to go, and they couldn't even walk places in many cases. And it doesn't have to be that way. So we know that the mixed use works, and viable. It's about kind of instead of spending £20 million on expanding a road junction, what could we do with that money? There's it's an enormous amount of funds which could go elsewhere. Encouraging people, building community centres, bringing people together, and fair. I think all of the above really. It's too many of us are in transport poverty and living very isolated lives. And I think what we've been talking about, if it can happen, could transform people's lives for the better. So.
Thank you, Laura. John.
I've got 3 things. One is designation. I think it would be good to make some big national decisions everyone knows it's happening and where it's happening, and then let the detail be decided locally. I think we need a delivery authority to support each new town, well-resourced design codes which have got clear red lines and flexibility to allow for long-term planning as well, and control with people, I think, who have a long-term interest. It's really important we let people make decisions who have a long-term interest, and coupled with that, long-term thinking is clearly a stewardship model that makes sure these places are looked after, because durability isn't just physical materials, it's actually making sure there's robust governance that can control and manage the whole places for the benefit of the futures of it.
Well, so for the record, I hope you're involved in planning some of these, because that was a very, very brilliant answer, Anthony.
So my 3 things were bolster master planning and infrastructure, because that's going to be really important, especially the point about that point you made about phasing and all that. Actually, we really need good infrastructure, and you know, a good example of HIF funding is that it probably doesn't work for most of it, because the fact it's actually a loan, and actually we need the government to really bolster that a lot. Another one is think about the economy, because I think that was a great point. You know, sadly, I've lived in places where there just has been no economy. There has been no shops and everything like that, and those are vital ecosystems to make a place really thrive. So we really do need to think about the economy. And last one, let's all be vulnerable in our partnerships.
Gosh.
Second had a spontaneous applause. Well done, Mary. Pull the conversation to an elegant and thought-provoking close.
I'm going to echo the call for legacy and stewardship to be built in from the start. These are not optional extras. This is where we failed and ended up with a lot of urban extensions, garden villages that weren't garden villages, they were just branded something different. It's absolutely essential. Think of Milton Keynes Parks Trust, think of Letchworth Garden City, but also think of the MK tariff as a means to actually get these things repaid. I think the second thing is, let's hope these don't get killed in a whole wave of we can't afford them. This isn't about subsidy, this is an investment. The government can make that investment and it will be paid back. But it won't happen overnight, and it won't happen in comprehensive spending reviews. And I suppose, just echoing, you mentioned Fred Roach, I think it was him, make no small plans.
Yeah.
You see with Milton Keynes, you see with the successful new towns, you can't just incrementally build it. You've got to think strategically, and you've really got to have the drive and the passion to deliver it.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen on the panel, I hope you all feel that was an enjoyable as well as a thought-provoking and an important conversation. I certainly do. Huge thanks to SLR for allowing us to be on it.